Welcome to the Kitcar History File series, where we'll be going through the industry's past. We'll be visiting old marques of long ago, some modern ones, some mostly older stuff, a lot of archive information with photographs and information on the cars they made, the people involved and what happened to them. Hi, welcome to the Total Kitcar YouTube channel and indeed the Total Kitcar History Files. My name's Steve Hole, editor of TKC Mag and totalkitcar.com, and I warmly welcome you back to the channel if you're old around, if you're familiar around here, and if you're not, I won't use the joke that I regularly wheel out, but let's just say if this video has appeared in your feed in a random fashion, just give us a couple of minutes and see if you like what you hear. We in a nutshell, we look at the history of the UK's marvellous kit car industry, which in 2024, when I'm recording this, celebrates 75 years. Again, at the risk of treading over old ground, but remembering that we need to do away with assuming that listeners all know what we're talking about. It was 1949 when a marvellous chap called Derek Buckler, who, with the recommencement of a gentle recommencement of motorsport post-war, when stuff was in short supply, had fashioned himself a little sprint hill climb car that he called the Buckler Mark V. It wasn't because it was his fifth design, it was because he didn't want people thinking he was a wet behind the ears and a rookie. So he thought he'd call it a Mark V, bless him. That car was so successful, or relatively successful for that particular period in time, that Derek was asked by others if they could have one. He didn't give them a copy of his car exactly, but he did sell them significantly. He did sell them a package in component form to enable them to build their own chassis just like his, and use his suspension components. And by doing that, Derek became the father, shall we say, of the UK's kit car industry. He was apparently a character, and he probably wouldn't even recognise what the word kit car meant, or the words kit and car meant, but he certainly deserves full acknowledgement, and he gets our respect. Anyway, moving swiftly on, this episode I'm very pleased to be covering one of my personal favourite kit car marques. Really had I suppose three chapters, but they've had two real chapters in their history, and I'm pleased to say that I've got on very well with both of those protagonists, and the company's called MARLIN, or the marque's called MARLIN, initially trading as MARLIN, I always put an G on it by accident, MARLIN Engineering, and then in chapter 2 they became MARLIN Cars. But let's roll that right the way back. They're one of the most significant marques in UK kit car history, without a doubt. Founded by a chap called Paul Morehouse, a really talented and gifted engineer, dare I say that, use that word. After college he'd done a 4-year, I think it was a 4-year course, apprenticeship course at Rolls-Royce. Now, I've seen it written over the years that he did that at Rolls-Royce Cars. He didn't. He did it at the once joined division that was the aviation aircraft engine division. And I think that was 1972 when he started there. And I remember speaking to him about that. He said it was a fantastic grounding. He couldn't have done any better. Considerable skills employed at Derby at that time at Rolls-Royce. Some gifted machinists, engineers, etc., etc. And Paul told me once that he experienced every aspect of that shop floor. Spent time in every of the blue collar departments. Learnt, well, anything you can think of that's machined or fabricated in metal. He probably experienced it as a young man, learnt how to do it as a young man, and indeed became a gifted welder too. Stuff that stood him in good stead. I think he also, of course, had an interest in cars, and while all this was going on, I think he built a selection over the years of various one-off specials. I think he built 6 cars in all in his youth. That included 2 Jaguar-based specials and a single-seater, and a couple of traditional roadsters, which were significant, but we'll come to those shortly. He also built a 12-metre yacht hull, which is quite interesting. So he was definitely into all aspects of messing around with cars and boats, by the sounds of it. Now, as inevitably, we talked about Derek briefly, Derek Buckler, and people saying that they wish to have a replica of his successful little sports car. So it was similar with Paul Morehouse. He was told by several friends that certainly the traditional roadsters, that I think were the final sort of specials, perhaps. I think the cliche is you could sell a few of them, mate. And so he put that to test. What had kind of running parallel with that? What had kind of undone him a little bit at Rolls-Royce? Well, I think that was the time when Rolls-Royce went into liquidation. I think it was the aviation engine side, and because I think it was the RB211 engine, which was pretty revolutionary, but it also had problems with the carbon fibre blades on the engines, which I think cost them a lot of money, and recalls and such like. Fantastic material, and of a composite nature, but I don't think at that time it was ready for use in such an environment as an aircraft engine, a commercial aircraft engine. And I think that took them, I don't know enough about that, but I think it took the company into liquidation, and it resulted, of course, with lots of redundancies, and inevitably they started again. But by that time, I think a lot of talent needed to put food on their tables, quite frankly, and I think Paul's one of those that went off and did something else. But talking about composites, that it may not have worked from a commercial point of view for Rolls-Royce aero engines, but certainly it taught him about composites, and that again stood him in good stead. I think he learnt that the composites stuff at the Hucknall factory in Nottinghamshire, I believe. He also did some stuff. I think Rolls-Royce had, or again, I'm not as clued up as I should be on that really. Rolls-Royce had a nuclear division, the nuclear department, and he did some work in there. I think he was a process engineer in there. I think around the time when he left Rolls-Royce, he also worked. He'd also, for a time, beg your pardon, he'd also had spent some time with the nuclear department, so he was did some engineering work within that department, which again was good experience. And following Rolls-Royce, he worked, I don't know, I think it was British Rail's engineering division, and he certainly had some input on, I guess, his colloquially called the tilting train, which I think was the HS 125 or something like that. Again, I don't know much about trains, I'm a car man, but that certainly had to be involved. But I don't think he was there very long, because sort of late 78, when his friends had said you could sell a few of those cars, and these traditional roadsters, that was when he really got involved with the car business, setting up Marlin cars in Plymouth. Now I can probably even today still drive to that industrial estate that Paul was based on. I can see it now in my mind, and certainly I know that Tecalimit were based very close to his units. But do you think I can think of the name? I think it's an age thing, but certainly that's where they were based, and they were called Marlin Engineering. The first one of those 2 cars, I remember that one quite well. One of the car I think that he used as a daily driver was registered 566 URR. Now I don't know if I'm impressed that I can remember that, or it's quite sad. Just like I can remember what the first Lee Noble's Ultima was registered as, NUT 602P, I think. So it's funny what you remember. But anyway, Marlin Roadster, as it was called, really was a good thing. It was a body was made from a combo of alley and GRP panels. As I said, it had been proof of design had been in the making for 5 years. It certainly was on sale in 1979, via early 1979, and I think it was a very fledgling type little advert, tentative little 8th page advert in Custom Car all magazines that got Paul on the map, and did bring some serious inquiries in. The car itself was really quite advanced and plenty of innovation for its day, featuring stuff like a rollover bar that was built into the windscreen frame, which was definitely unheard of, I think, in the kit car game at that time, certainly on a volume basis, and certainly years before Audi started to boast about the fact they were doing it. The car itself was based on Triumph Herald primarily, although of course you could use the Vitesse, you could use the Spit, and you could use GT6. And I remember amusingly, now it sounds amusing, but back then it was probably bang on. Paul said you could use a Bond to keep, which now you probably wouldn't want to break, but I guess a bit like the people that broke Ford Escort Mark 1s and 2s to produce Duttons, all due respect to Tim, who I've got a massive amount of respect for, but he just wouldn't probably nowadays. It could also use, the chassis was really quite advanced for its day, and you could also, certainly later on, after the first couple of 100 kits, you could use the Triumph Rotoflex with suspension, which I think came off the Vitesse, if my memory serves me right. Prices were set at £655, unbelievably, for that first Herald-based or Triumph-based kit, and he did about 250 of those really quickly, i.e. within a year. That quick. 1979 came a Morris Marina-based, or of course Ital mechanicals could be used if you preferred, which meant that you could use a 1275 A series, you could use a 1700 O series if you really wanted to, or the 1800 twin cam B engine. And lots of people did. I think that was actually technically known as a Mark II. I think that was actually 1981 that came out from memory. I like to test myself by doing this without a massive script, and just to see if I did listen and I did learn anything. So if I'm incorrect on that, please forgive me. But that's when I think it was. There was a Mark III hybrid Roadster, and someone actually genuinely asked me about 6 months ago if that meant that it was Marlin were one of the first companies to produce a plug-in hybrid, which kind of knocked me sideways. I was completely bemused by that. Then I realised what the guy meant. But Marlin, or Paul Morehouse, meant back in those days of pre-real sort of volume electrification, he meant that the car could have that Mark III had Triumph front suspension, and I think it was Marina or Ital rear suspension, and that was kind of his meaning of the word hybrid, which is fair enough. It had become quite popular for classic trials use. It was not in the class or the volume numbers of things like Cannons or Alexis trials cars for sure, but the old bouncers liked it a lot, and you still see your Marlin, I think Marlin Roadster on the hills in the mud, thriving in the mud indeed. And I think if you're a front runner in some of those championships, I think you wouldn't. You probably wouldn't want a Marlin, but certainly if you just want to have some fun and you're a midfield runner, then you're not going to be disgraced by any stretch of the imagination. Other engines that could be used, of course, Triumph 4 and 6 cylinder, Ford Kent, Ford Pinto, even Ford Zetec have been pressed into use quite late on. Of course, I've driven a couple of Alfa Romeo twin cam powered roadsters, which are exquisite. And I think I might have got my backside in the seat of a Rover V8, because I certainly think there was a few of those with Rover V8s that were built. In fact, I know there was. So it was quite offered the customer plenty of choice. So once the stir of the Roadster had died down, Paul was selling kits quickly. He'd inevitably, as sure as night follows day, young couples were saying, well, look, you know, we've got a young family, we'd love a Marlin, but we can't get our family in the Roadster. And as I said, night follows day, so Paul created a 2+2, which enabled them to take little people out in it. And it wasn't called a Roadster 2+2 though, imaginatively. Paul took the time and care and effort to design a new model, really. Well, it was a new model in the shape of the Berlinetta. That was a 2+2, a very good car actually. Never caught on in the way that the Roadster did. Yeah, so it certainly was a significant model. Optional hardtop for that one, which I think sets the car off, and I think lots of people did, because most people ordered a hardtop with their Berlinettas. Into the 90s we go. Marlin in good form. Paul had developed a new model, or a development of the Roadster, I suppose, which was Ford Sierra based, called the Cabrio. It was wider, longer, had just generally more space in it, as I guess as a race we're getting bigger, and so forth. So therefore Paul recognised that with the Cabrio, and just a general sort of overhaul of what he'd originally done back in the 70s, really. Not a replica, but it was Van den Pla inspired for sure. Semi-monocoque underpinnings on the chassis front, and I would venture that it was again typical Paul with innovation and design engineering skill. It was probably more advanced than it needed to be, but that was typical Marlin, and has indeed been typical Marlin over the years, actually, to their credit. 1992, I always forget this, 91, 92 I think it was, when I think Paul couldn't service 3 models. So his hitherto agents were originally called, well, they were known as Yorkshire Kit Cars, and they were general build agents to several manufacturers, including obviously Marlin and Pilgrim Cars, among others, run by a chap who's become a really good friend of mine, Steve Himsworth, and his business partner or technical man, Clive Gamble. And they've been selling quite a few Berlinettas and Roadsters as agents for Paul. And it was logical that Paul, who was also bringing on stream his range of Marlin submarines, but we'll come to that in a minute, as you do. There's one to throw into the pot there. You suddenly mentioned the word submarine. Not something you always associate with kit car companies, but such was the level of engineering that Paul was capable of, really. He couldn't service those 3 models, so those cars, the projects, the Berlinetta and the Roadster, were bought lock, stock and barrel by Yorkshire Kit Cars, who later became best known as just YKC Sports Cars. Clive was a clever lad. Those models, we'll come to that in a minute. We'll talk about that. I'll just give YKC some credit. We'll talk about them in shortly. But this is a Marlin episode, so we should concentrate on Marlin, which we will do. Shortly after that, 92-93, came the arrival on the scene of 2 very significant people, a couple called Mark and Terry Matthews. And I'm very pleased to say this video is a tribute to Mark. It's been 10 years since my friend Mark had passed away, taken far too soon. A chap I admired incredibly. Always enjoyed a bit of banter and a bit of just spending time with Mark, really. He had firm beliefs in what he wanted to do. He'd tell you straight if he disagreed with you, which I really liked. There's not many people in this game that are brave enough to do that, I think, and I respect people. I try and call a spade, if you will, and so, you know, and I respect other people. There's several manufacturers that have earned extra respect from me for over the years for giving me what they think is a proper dressing down, and a couple of them I still bear the bruises probably, and Mark was one of them. If he thought I did something wrong, he'd tell me, but after he told you, it was done with, and you moved on, and again I respected him for that as well. There was no grudge to be borne by Mark. Terry, his partner, later wife, brilliant. Not many people were better at marketing kit cars than Terry Matthews. She was brilliant at it. She made sure that she got the MARLIN marque, who'd become MARLIN Cars when they took over the business, and moved to Crediton, Lord's Meadow Industrial Estate. Remember that one? Went there many times. And she developed the marque. Between them, Mark developed the cars, and Terry did a fantastic job on marketing, and just very good with dealing with customers. A really good people person is Terry, and she did a fabulous job. I'll have a couple of chuckles about Mark in this, and I mean no malice, and Terry knows me well enough to know that and how much I esteem I held Mark in. But there were some funny stories with Mark, and I remember talking to him at a show once when Terry had gone off for a toilet break, or just to talk to someone else or something, a lunch or something, and Mark was left manning the stand. And I think, Terry hopefully she forgives me for this, but I think she sometimes was a little bit nervous as to how Mark might react if certain customers came onto the stand. And I remember this chap went, and it was quite rude really, he went up to, I can't remember what it might have been, a sports store or something, and just went up to the door, opened it, and went to jump in it. And I remember Mark went bananas. He didn't like that. That was quite funny. But Terry was obviously on the stand enough, and they sold enough cars over the years that people really liked the way they did business and the way they treated customers. I think they're one of the companies kit car companies that most of their customers became good friends. And you can't say that all the time, but you certainly can with Marlin. I think NG, or certainly the John Hoyle period and the Nick Green period of NG, was just like that. One of the first things that Mark and Terry did, hitherto Marlin had only offered kits. They introduced turnkeys. I think probably if you knew Paul and he knew you and he liked you, you might persuade him to build you a turnkey car. I'm not entirely certain about that. But there are a lot of companies that said they only offered kits, but did offer fully built to certain customers. But so they introduced turnkeys. They'd already started to develop the Cabrio and shape it how they wanted it to be as a package. They took on the likes of Morgan, and Panther cars were still in existence at that time. Maybe not as in their heyday, but you could certainly still buy a Lima or a Callista. And Marlin took them on fair and square, really did. Even Morgan took them on fair and square, and we're doing very well in that regard. Always at British Motor Show, remember that? Andy Little does a great job with the one at Farnborough now, but the good old days of the British International Motor Show at either the NEC or Earl's Court, Terry and Marlin were always there. Big players in the ASCM as well, the Association of Specialist Car Manufacturers, which included the likes of Chesil, Dakar, NG, Suffolk Sports Cars, I think, and they often Grinnell, and they often had their own joint stand where they represented the ASCM, and as a result of that, their own products and the kit car industry. And Terry and Mark were big players in that. They also brought out a car called the Hunter, which obviously owed a lot to the Cabrio. I think that was only available fully built. And then in 1997, they carried on where Paul had left off really, and were more just developed the brand and the marque really. To celebrate 1997, we're going to come on to a car called the Sportster, because that's probably in my humble opinion, Marque's crowning glory, really. But in 1998, to celebrate 20 years of official Marlin existence, they brought out the Makira, Makaira, and that was very ambitious. It was everything they'd learnt from the Cabrio and the Hunter in one seriously excellent package. I don't actually think it was intended to be a volume seller. I think it was something to show as a I don't know, a moving advert for what Marlin could do, and it certainly put them on the map as that respect. And lots of people who hadn't kind of the Marlin cars, Marlin engineering hadn't registered, certainly did when they saw the Makira, and also, of course, aided by the fact that what Terry and Mark had been doing to raise the profile. Now, the Makira's interesting. It's a great name, actually, by the way. I don't know if you know about such things, you'll know that it's a genus of Marlin. So I thought that was quite good. Blue Marlin, I think. So that's kind of where the Makira, because lots of people said, we speculated, what's that mean? You know, the Greek god for football or something, being very facetious for a minute. But no, it was a very clever play on words with using a form of, I don't know, black marlin, blue marlin. It was certainly marlin fish related anyway, so I thought it was clever. Rolling back 1 year to 1997, and as I mentioned briefly, the Sportster. Mark and Terry had noticed that the Lotus 7 as a genre was proving very popular. Probably at that time we might have had about 25, maybe more, companies offering their take on the Lotus 7 theme, including Westfield and Coachram, obviously. There seemed at that time to be room for all of them. The traditional roadster was still a popular genre in its own right, but I think the arrival of SVA, as it was then, IVA now, had scared a few people, and it certainly almost overnight put the brakes on a lot of traditional roadster kits because of the fear over the external projection requirements and such, like internal projections. Marlin proved that it could be done, as did NG, but a lot of others didn't, and they kind of almost pulled the plug on things overnight. So Marlin weathered that, no problem. And our cars used to cruise through IVA, SVA. But Mark looked at the Lotus 7 and thought he'd do it his way and offer his take on that thing by kind of mixing it with a Marlin Hunter Cabrio to create what was clearly a Marlin in the form of the Sportster. Brilliant car, absolutely brilliant. Particularly when I think it probably was the early noughties, could have been the year 2000 even, when Mark decided that the BMW would be, he was a pioneer of BMW donors, by the way. He kind of worked out that not only was a BMW potential, as long as you could get around the electronics and maybe the trickery of the rear suspension for kit car use, decided that the M3, the E46 generation M3 engine, which BMW might call the M50, I think, 346 brake horsepower, pretty relatively lightweight and just a fierce thing, would be a great fit for a Sportster, and so it proved. Sportster BMW M3 powered car remains one of the finest kit cars I have ever driven. A stunning thing. A real tribute to Mark. As I say, this video is not only a sort of tip hat to Marlin as a Mark, but it's a tribute to Mark Matthews. Let's just talk about YKC briefly. Let's interject there. They'd acquired the Roadster and the Berlinetta, I think, in '92, something like that. They created out of that, well, they marketed the Roadster in their own guys. Clive Gamble had done some work with what they, I guess, was loosely termed the new Roadster. Clever chap, Clive Gamble. The Roadster, like it was with Marlin, Roadster was outsold the Berlinetta, so that was kind of, I think, gently just put on the burner. Was available if somebody wanted one, but they majored on the Roadster. Now that then led directly to the Romero in about 97, 98. That was a nice car, developed from the Marlin, had its origins, but was engineered by Clive Gamble. That in turn spawned developments of that car, and I think different names, but I think pretty much denoted type of windscreen and type of wing at the front. So you had the Imola, the Giulietta, and the Mille Miglia. I think that one had aero screens, but I'm not sure. I can't remember. Giulietta may have had flowing front wings, and the Imola might have had cycles, but don't hold me to that. They also developed a V8, generally much larger racing version called the Raider. One of the few kit cars, touch wood, that I've ever blown up an engine up on. Actually, I'm not proud of it, and I'm not saying it to be glib. But I remember at Castle Combe on an action day, we used to have the kit car action day at Combe, about 1998. That V8, that Rover V8, put a rod through the side of the block, and YKC were very, very good about it. And it's one of these things, I think, and I'm very regrettable, because you always feel terrible when it's not your car and something like that happens. But moving swiftly on, so that was YKC. They carried on under various guises. Steve moved on in the early 2000s. His later business partner Don Burt ran the company, and they carried on for quite a time, but moved away from traditional roadsters, acquired the Formula 27 marque. There's probably another marque that we could do a video on. Under Steve Porter, they evolved quite nicely, and were probably one of the pioneers in the late 90s of the superbike engine fitted to kit cars, along with Fisher and of course Tim Pell of Pell Engineering with his Genesis. But once again, let's not interject too much. I think it was 2002 when the BMW based Sportster came along. So that was Mark's crowning moment, I think, as far as I'm concerned. They moved the Cabrio onto a company called Javelin Sports Cars in Bradford, actually, quite, I think, coincidentally, based very close, maybe next door, or I think the Jarrett factory was Bradford's most famous car manufacturer over the years. I think that factory had been razed to the ground, been demolished, but I think their little workshop was located quite close. So the fact they called it Javelin was a nice tip of the hat to the Jarrett Javelin. I honestly can't remember the name of the couple that took it over. Very nice people. I actually visited them, did a feature, but it just wasn't to be for them, even though they went to some shows. Sadly, it wasn't to be. And then by the miracle of a hazy memory, I think the chap's name was Dave Kitson, and I think he took it over in 2007. There you go. How good is that? How amazing that I've remembered that. And I think it was effectively the Mark II Cabrio, which had appeared in year 2000, that they acquired. And of course the Hunter was BMW based as well. We should remember that. The Hunter was also BMW based. I think the Kitsons took that over as well. And I'm pretty certain the car that I drove and did a feature on, the Javelin Cabrio, was indeed BMW powered. Then we go all the way through the 90s. Marlin are going great guns, really, doing really well. They came up with the Cool Cars brand to market a car called the 5EXI. If you think Strathcarron or Javan R1, then you're going to be quite close. It was another personal pet project for Mark, that originally based or powered by K-Series, Rover K-Series, which, as we all know, it gets a lot of stick, but if you get a good one and it's had the head gasket done, is a very good engine. Certainly Caterham and Lotus probably sold thousands of cars that were powered by K-Series engines, so great engine for the car. Mark spent the next few years, he entered the 750 Motor Club's kit car series in the car, latterly settled on the Castle Combe GT, iconic race series at Castle Combe Circuit, the GT series. Nearer to home, of course, in Crediton, much nearer, and it was always based, it's called Castle Combe GT series for a reason, because it's based at Castle Combe. So he was doing quite well in that, I think. Then, of course, we had Mark's diagnosis with a terrible illness. But Mark, being the guy he was, he never let it get him down. He must have had moments where it was destructive to him and soul destroying, but Mark carried on. Whenever I met him, not long before his death, he was still always upbeat, always ploughing on, and indeed his last notable project, he was working on a BMW diesel based Sportster, which Terry, after his death, Terry and the guys at the works, who carried on for a couple of years, several years in fact, albeit on a lower key, they actually finished that car off as their own tribute to Mark. And I drove that car, did a feature on it, and that was fantastic. The torque of that diesel engine in a car that probably weighed less than half of the BMW that it came out of was just a laugh a minute, absolute hoot. You didn't really need to change gear in it. It's so much grunt. Great thing. I'll interject with a story on a trip to the Nürburgring now, I think. Back in the day, like many magazines, we would promote the beauty and the attraction of the Nordschleife until we stopped doing it because it got so busy. So we would often go to the Nürburgring and go with manufacturers, classed as a one, during public days indeed, it's classed as a one-way public road. So road traffic laws apply loosely there, and indeed if you have an accident, German PLOB will turn up and want to know what happened. But now I think laps cost sort of €40 and stuff, and it's absolutely bombed out with people, as it should be, because it's a brilliant place to go. I mean, if you've never been, go, it's fantastic, just the experience of being there. But at the time I'm talking, round about 2010, I guess, 2009, you could still go to a public afternoon and not have to use the overflow car park over the road. You'd be able to go into the cafe and get a cup of coffee without queuing up, and just be a generally great thing. Anyway, this particular day, Mark and Terry had come. They took they'd taken a 5EXO. By the way, woe-betide people that would ask Mark at a show or walk up to him and say, "Can you tell me about the Marlin Sexy?" They set up a new sub-brand called Cool Cars. That's 2 Ks, cool, K for cool and K for cars. And the car, as I said, was called the 5EXI. Some people took to calling it the Sexy, which I don't think Terry minded too much, but certainly Mark did. And woe betide anyone if you actually asked him and called it the Sexy, because he'd put you straight. Brilliant. Anyway, so we went there, and this was unbelievable to this day. I still can't quite believe it happened. We turned up on a public afternoon, a 1 till 5 session, I think. Weather was okay. It had been raining in the morning, unfortunately. And it was 3 cars on the track. There was 3 cars for most of that session that we were there. One was a guy from Bosch who was with a Ferrari of some description, 458 maybe. Probably don't hold me to that, but it could have been. In fact, I think it might have been a 360. Anyway, he was from Bosch, and he was testing out a new fuel injection system or engine management system or something. So he had his computer and his briefcase plumbed into the car, and he was just going. He was using the public day, which is unusual because they normally use industry days for that sort of stuff. But he was there, minding his own business, and there was a really nice Dutch guy in a lovely Porsche 924. He's all on his own, bless him. And then there was us. I think Mark went out first to just give the car a check over and to make sure all was okay. And I don't think he'd ever been to the Nordschleife before. I think Terry might have gone with him. I'm pretty certain Terry might have gone with him. And they went off and had some fun and came back, and then it was my turn. Mark trusted me, and I'm delighted about that, because he didn't, I don't think, wouldn't give his car up to everybody. And certainly he'd had some experiences with journalists who hadn't particularly been mechanically sympathetic and one in particular, and I daresn't mention the guy's name or the magazine, but it was it was a well-known magazine, and Mark ended up with a blown-up engine and stuff, and it ended very nastily, but or just didn't work out. So I was really honoured, really, that Mark would let me drive his car to Nordschleifer, and it was one that probably was available for sale, but certainly not. I think I might have been one of the first people other than Mark to drive it, that's for sure. So it was great. So he still was a little bit reticent, and basically, if I broke it, I'd be paying for it, I think, one of those, because he treated his cars as his own babies, and Terry would certainly confirm that. All was well. I went out, I took it quite easily. I obviously always sort of, when you've got a manufacturer's car and the manufacturer is there, I think it's rude to rag a car that doesn't belong to me, really, and I've always been a bit susceptible to that view. So I've always got a bit of sympathy with other people's property, and I'm proud of that, really. And I started to build up the speed, but by the time I got literally halfway round, so it's nearly 14-mile circuit, I think, so probably 6 and a bit miles round, it felt like the car felt like it was misfiring, and then it turned out when I went up hills, it was obvious it was fuel starvation, and there could only be one reason for that: it ran out of petrol. So if you can picture this scene, it's a damp or recovering from the damp afternoon, no sun to speak of. There's buzzards and eagles and beautiful things like that making that beautiful noise as they're flying and swirling and twirling above me. There's no other cars on the track, there's no marshals or anything on a public day like that, that's for sure. So I had no mobile phone then, so I decided to sit on the Armco. Wished I hadn't, because I looked over my shoulder behind me down the hill, and there was, well, identify that bit of bike, really. There was tanks, wings, bonnets of cars, all sorts of things just slung over the Armco, which was interesting. And then I heard the distinctive sound and howl of a flat plane crank, and that was the Ferrari, miles away probably when I first caught sound of it. Really on it, and that was the guy from Bosch, and I thought, well, I'll try and flag him down. And I put the car, no damage, thankfully, excuse me, and I just parked it on a very boggy verge, which just the edge of the circuit. When I sat there waiting, really didn't quite know what to do. There was no course car came round or anything, so I just sat there. I tried to flag the Bosch man down, but it became very apparent very quickly that he wasn't interested in stopping, because he was on a mission. So I sort of dejectedly sat back up on the Armco. And then my saviour came along in the form of the very nice Dutchman and his Porsche. He saw me, and he thought I was in trouble, and I guess assumed that I'd had a little accident. But of course I hadn't. I just, like a dork, had run out of petrol. And he probably came onto the grass verge quicker than he should have done, and earlier than he should have done, because he realised it was a bog, and proceeded to put, as he tried to stop, put two very deep tyre tram lines into the grass, which, excuse me again, later raised the alarm of Mark when he turned up, because he thought I'd gone off, and nearly hurt me a punch in the throat, that's for sure. But he stopped. I explained to him. He said, would you like to use my mobile phone? I didn't know Mark and Terry's number. I don't think Carol had a mobile phone then, but she was looking after mine, because I didn't want to drop it in the car, as you do. That's pretty overconfident of me. But he said he would go back to the paddock. He'd seen the Marlin trailer, and he would tell him, and he surely did. And I to this day, I didn't see him again, but I thank him for his assistance. He even offered me a biscuit. He had a packet of McVitie's digestives on his passenger seat. I always remember. That's something. It's funny how you remember stuff. And he very sweetly offered me a McVitie's digestive, which I took actually. About 20 minutes later, because don't forget he had 7 miles to go to get back to the paddock, the public paddock. about 20 minutes, half an hour later, Mark turned up. He hadn't told them what I'd run out of petrol, which is interesting. So the course car came along, nice guy, very friendly chap, very efficient. And Mark, who jumped, before the car had stopped, Mark jumped out of the passenger seat, came running, storming up the hill, looked at the tram lines that I'd created in the grass as he came up the hill. He was quite a quick runner, I thought, Mark. Anyway, he didn't lamp me, although he basically, I'll miss out a few words, but what have you done, or what's happened, Steve? And I just said, Mark, he's run out of petrol, mate. And when he found out that I hadn't damaged his car, he was happy. As I definitely would have been. Course car man gave us a lift out the circuit to the nearest petrol station down in Ardenau, down in the valley. Really nice guy. He, in theory, they certainly do now, I think, if you hold up a public day, they can charge you for the mislaps that your misdemeanour has caused. And if you damage the Armco or any part of our road furniture, they actually reserve the right to charge you for that. I was there when a car bottomed out and knocked its sump plug out and basically dropped its lunch all over the track. I think they charged the guy £150 to get the car back and something like 200 quid for cement dust, I think. So it was quite an expensive experience for him, considering he blew a Duratec up, 2 litre Duratec up as well. And I think until he paid, the guy with a removal tow truck wouldn't let it off. That's another story. So where was I? So therefore, yeah, the man had let us roll down the hill. He didn't charge us anything for the circuit. There wasn't anyone there, but he did know just down the road. He took us to a secret little cut in the Armco, which you can't actually see very well if you watch on a video or you go steaming past when you're on the circuit. But it's a little gap in the Armco that they use to poke course cars and marshals cars, I think, and we just went in there. I never lived that one down with Mark for quite a good few years. I did enjoy the car, but moving swiftly on. So Mark sadly, tragically passed away. Rest in peace, mate. And the company was bought by or taken over by one of Mark and Terry's erstwhile long-term employees, a guy called Kev, who will still produce, I think, spares and do some maintenance and stuff on your Marlin. I hope one day he'll offer a new Marlin kits again. That reminds me, I need to speak to Kev to see how state of play is and catch up. The Marlin legacy continues, not only because of the brilliant cars, but aided by the very, very fine folk at the Marlin Owners Club, and I think that's marlinownersclub.co.uk or .com. Well worth visiting their website. It's very informative. There's history there. If I've got any history there wrong in this video, I hope they don't hold it against me. The stuff it's just stuff I've sort of talked about his personal experience, but clouded perhaps by memory or lack of it these days. It's an age thing. But they really are the experts when it comes to Marlins, and they do a fantastic job keeping the memory alive. Excuse me. I think I'll have a swig of drink actually. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So let's talk numbers. Oh, I should say that Mark continued to develop the 5EXI, and he had Honda VTEC options in the latter days, and that was a fierce thing. Brilliant car, and that if ever an engine, the K series was good, but if ever an engine suited a car, it was the Honda VTEC in a Marlin 5 or Cool Cars 5EXI. But let's talk sales numbers now. As ever, the fish was far bigger than it actually was when it comes to kit car sales numbers. A lot of it is guesstimate, a lot of it is tall stories. We can only get a certain handle on these things through experience and inside knowledge, I suppose. But I'll have and again, I hope the Owners Club don't give me a rocket when I see them at the National Kit Car Motor Show in a few weeks' time at Malvern. There's a plug for that, by the way, 1st and 2nd of June 2024. Don't go on that date if it's 2025, for goodness sake. I shouldn't really. I probably created my own monster there because I shouldn't have done this. Really, time date something in a video. But as I speak, it's 2024. We're just a few weeks out from the National Kitcar Motor Show at it was Stoneleigh. Don't go to Stoneleigh. It's Malvern, Three Counties Showground. I hope they don't hold these numbers against me when they see me. I'd say Roadster, we could be looking at 2,500 units, which is a significant number for a kit car manufacturer. Puts it right up there in the top 10 of sales league. Berlinetta, perhaps 400, I would guess. Hunter, probably as many as 180. Makara, I think 1, possibly 2, but I think 1. Although I do know 1 that was sold. Other than that, 2. Sportster, I think 150. Should have been 1150. Should have been hundreds more than it actually sold because it is a brilliant car. Cabrio, maybe 100. Maybe. I'm a little bit. That is a wide one on that. I should have checked with Terry on that one. And the 5XI maybe 75, and forgive me if those are out or in any way, shape or form, but it just is a flavour of how important and significant Marlin were as a marque, and that should never be underestimated. Quick talk on submarines. Now, Paul developed his submarines from the mid to late 80s, and he went from the Marlin S1, which was a tentative first one-man diesel electric submarine, to serious manufacturer of submarines, working with various navies around the world, commercial purposes, and he became a serious, I don't want to use the word player, but if you know what I mean, player, I mean in the best sense that he was a serious manufacturer of submarines, specialist submarines. He really did get his money, and I'm not sure if he's still involved with submarines, but certainly until very recently, you can read about his submarine history. There's a very informative website, and I think it's steel, that's steel as in steel, -fish.com. I think he originally traded as Marlin Marine or something like that. He may later have traded as steel-fish or steelfish, but the website I think was steel-fish.com. Just Google Paul Morehouse submarines or something similar, and you can spend as long as you want reading about Paul's submariner activities. And that kind of brings me to the close of this one. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got this far and you haven't already subscribed, then please, if you consider doing that, it won't cost you a penny. Click the all button that drops down, little drop down menu when you hit subscribe, and then you'll be notified of every Nearly Said issue, episode or video that we publish or release, or whatever the term is. If you could also hit the like button on the way out, I'll turn the lights off. That's pretty much how it works. I should also say, again, I'm writing this mid-May. I'm stuck in magazine world. I'm speaking this in mid-May, and I'm absolutely knocked out by the fact we've just hit 1,000 subscribers, which confuses and bemuses me unbelievably. I was encouraged to do this only about a year ago, to make use of our archive, our unbelievably brilliant archive, and to talk about some of my experiences with some of these great old manufacturers, and just praise the kit, just sort of respect to the kit car industry in the UK. Really, I wasn't sure, but I thought I'd give it a go. I'm not very good at the voiceover stuff. I've never professed to be. I'd like to know, and I like to think I know a little bit about the subject, so I thought I'll give it a go. Let's give it a go. And I never really thought about how many people might want to listen to my ramblings, but I'm absolutely knocked out. I never in a million years thought that 1,000 subscribers would ever, or 1,000 people would ever be interested in listening to it. But I did read the other day on some stats that someone put in front of me that 77% of the people that are viewing our videos at the moment aren't subscribed. So fantastic that you're listening to the stuff we put out, and I really appreciate that, and really thank you for that. But please subscribe, it would really help the channel. But and apologies as well, this one is a slightly longer video than normal. I like to keep them about 35-40 minutes tops, but this one was a special tribute in memory of Mark Matthews, who died unbelievably 10 years ago this year. So it's a tribute to Mark as well as a tribute to Marlin. So please forgive me, and if you have to, listen to it in 2 chunks maybe. When you fall asleep after half an hour, come back to it another time. But wherever you are in the world, whatever time of day it is, thanks for giving up a chunk of your day to listen to this little old video that we've recorded, and I look forward to welcoming you again to the channel soon. Thank you very much.
You